Often we assume when we recognize that we are stuck and that we know logically that we need to change our behavior, that we should do it.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, that feeling, the pull to old patterns, again, whether we're talking about sitting on the sofa rather than going to the gym, reaching for the drink when we know that we said we wouldn't, whether we're talking about dating that person where now we've seen maybe 10 red flags, right? We're not just talking about one amber flag. The compulsion to continue because it feels on some level familiar, good, amazing, alluring to us.
Mm-hmm.
The compulsion is much stronger than people realize.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show, where I had a super interesting conversation with Dr. Sophie Mort, aka online, you might know her as Dr. Soph. She's a clinical psychologist, Sunday Times bestselling author, and is the British mental health expert for Headspace. I actually know her because I started following her on Instagram a whole bunch of years ago. And she's just very compelling. I think she's an original thinker. She's got this great book out. It's called Unstuck: 5 Steps to Break Bad Habits and Get Out of Your Own Way. And in this conversation, we're talking about all the ways to get unstuck. And she also has a fantastic quiz that you can take, quick quiz that will help you figure out or if you're self-sabotaging and why. And you can get that at Dr. Soph, DrSoph.com. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Terri Cole Show with Dr. Soph as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. I am super excited to welcome my internet friend, Dr. Soph, to the Terri Cole Show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So many things to discuss, Soph. And one thing that you write about, you wrote a book that came out in 23 called Unstuck: 5 Steps to Break Bad Habits and Get Out of Your Own Way. And I find this topic is it's something that I get questions about it all the time, still very, very consistently, with people being well aware that they're in their own way, but really being unsure about how to get out. So before we hit that, because that's basically going to be lots of points about the book, I want to know about you a little bit. You know, like how, like in the Marvel world, people have their origin stories. I would love to know Sophie's origin story.
I love that. I'm also a Marvel fan, or at least early Marvel anyway. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that reference. When I was kind of 18 years old, I'd finished school and I was doing an art degree. And I felt really invincible. You know, that feeling of, I don't really care about the future because I know that I don't really need to think about it right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit of a badass. I can do what I want. And the fall from grace was swift, is all I can say. I went from feeling all powerful to having my first panic attack. And I don't know if you've had a panic attack before,
Mm-hmm.
but it is really, when I say frightening, I know that word just does not convey the absolute terror that
Yep.
floods your whole being when you have that. And I hadn't really heard of panic attacks before then. I really didn't know what was going on. I thought I was either having a heart attack
Mm-hmm.
or losing my mind. And, you know, both of those outcomes, absolutely terrifying. And after I'd had one, they just kept coming, and understandably, right? Because I was starting to feel panicked, but because I thought I'm going to die or go mad, the panic escalated and I
Yeah.
just ended up stuck in this cycle of panic. So I stopped uni for a while, tried to figure it out, found out it was panic, went to a medical doctor and was put on antidepressants, and they just made me so much worse. And for some people, antidepressants will save their lives. And for a minority, it can make their symptoms much worse. And I was in that minority. So, long story short, cut to
Mm-hmm.
the good bit, I found the right therapist who was like, you're having panic attacks. This is the psychoeducation around your fight flight response. These are the exercises you're going to do. And I basically did breathing exercises like my life depended on it. I had my headphones in 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first day where suddenly the panic started and I did the breathing exercise and I stopped in its tracks. And I was like, oh my goodness, I think I'm gonna get through this. So once I eventually got on top of the panic, I basically couldn't go back to art school. I was like, I can't believe I thought I was gonna die. there's this really
Right.
reasonable explanation of what was happening. Once I'd
Mhm.
been taught it, everything got better. Why aren't we being taught this from a younger age?
Yep.
So I went into psychology and then vowed to kind of follow the path to become a psychologist and then get the information out there as quickly as possible. That very, very dark period of my life actually started my career as a clinical psychologist. And since then, I have been doing my best to share information every day in the public domain rather than wait till people are struggling to get that information to them.
It's amazing how you teach what you most needed or what you most need to learn, that how compelling it is when something moves. Like you actually did something that made you feel from being this super, you feel very I mean, victimized. I don't know if that's the right word,
Yeah.
but
So
unempowered.
disempowered. So
Yes,
disempowered, right? Yeah, absolutely. I
exactly.
had no power. I was at the mercy. It felt like I was at the mercy of the world and my brain.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was terrifying.
Yeah, it's amazing. I feel like I had a similar sort of young life experience of having therapy, my own therapy, changing my life so much. I thought I was like, why didn't someone fucking tell me about this sooner? Like, why doesn't anyone, why aren't we all doing this? I can't
Yeah.
believe that I could actually change my life. So let's move into the stuckness topic, because this is something that is so, again, there's so much pain. And even my very high functioning codependents, my high functioning mamas feel stuck at times, or
Mm.
stuck in a rut, or feel like they are, like exactly like your book says, getting in their own way, like not being their best self, but almost like knowing what that is, but not being able to sort of get there. So
Or
what do you
starting
say?
to get there and then finding themselves back at square one. Because I think, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I'm just
Yeah, yeah.
excited about this topic, right? I think everyone can so relate to feeling stuck. For some people, feeling stuck might be something more significant, like I've been drinking for a really long
Yep.
time or smoking for a really long time. I feel like I've lost control of it. And I simply cannot stop those habits by myself. But stuckness doesn't have to be such a significant thing, right? It
Hmm.
could be I press snooze on my alarm clock every morning to the point where I'm late and running out the door. It could be I'm having the same or similar feeling arguments with my partner or my friends or my colleagues. And every time I go to a new company, the same ending happens. You know, there's so many different versions. Often when we think about self sabotage, it's every time I get close to that success, something stops me from achieving it. But when we get in our own way, it could be one of a million things. Sometimes we're aware of them, and sometimes
Hmm.
we have no idea that we are the thing that's causing us to not achieve or hold on to the things that are important to us.
So how do we discern? Like how do you walk people when you have clients, or in the book itself? How do
Mm.
you walk us through? Like how do we discern what is us, and how to at least start to make moves towards getting out
Mm.
of our own way?
Ooh, great question. So I think there's a lot of parts to that that
Hmm.
question. When we feel like we're at the mercy of the world, right? When we feel like we aren't in the driving seat of our life, it can be helpful to consider that we might be getting in our own way, whether it's true or not, purely from the perspective of when I say maybe something I'm doing is causing this,
Yeah,
that means maybe something I can do in the
yeah,
future will change this
yeah.
situation. So sometimes I say to people, I have no idea right now if you're part and parcel of this. More often than not, it takes two to tango, so there will be something you're contributing to this
Sure.
situation, right?
Yeah.
But if we dare to consider that you have more control in this situation than you think, how's that going to help us get you to where you need to be in the future? The reason I start there is because often when we think maybe I'm getting in my own way, we can feel a bit blamed, right? A bit
Yep.
shamey, a bit like, oh God, I'm actually a person they think I want to be stuck in this position.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying we'd like to move you from a disempowered position
Yeah.
into a maybe I have things I can do to change my scenario. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I ask clients, and I have to say I do work with people who I've either worked with on and off for a long time, right? So maybe they came for panic in the first place, and now I'm seeing them for relationships. You know, they've gone away and they've come back a couple of years later. So I do know them quite well. or I'm working with people who come to clinic saying, I know I'm stuck, right? So there's a slight difference here. This is people who are kind of aware and, are at that kind of threshold of change. Often I'll say to someone, if they're kind of stuck in a relationship, if they're stuck in work or whatever it is, does this feel like another time?
Mm-hmm.
Is this totally unique to you, or has something like this happened in the past? And when someone's like, well, there was this time when I was dating someone and it ended kind of similar to this, or this was this time when I was having a fight and the topic was different, but I ended up still feeling really unheard, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or there was this time where I really wanted to say to someone, when you kept letting me down, I felt really rejected when you kept saying you couldn't see me. But I didn't say it, and that kind of made me feel like another time where I couldn't say what I wanted to say.
Yep.
So that's another thing, right? If this smells of something familiar,
Yep.
it's likely that there's something about the way that you interact with the world that you can change. So again, when we're saying you're getting in your own way, we're not saying you're doing something overtly to ruin your life. We're just saying there's something about the way you interact with the world that's maybe keeping you stuck. So those are kind of the first two parts of the answer to your question, which is how do we kind of kindly and compassionately introduce the idea that maybe there's something you could be doing that's different. I think what's been really interesting is there's been a real and brilliant explosion in people talking about habits over the last few years. The book Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, excellent. Wow. Atomic Habits, James Clear. I mean, what a book. And what I often see is people come to clinic saying, I've read these books, I've tried to change my habits, and I'm still stuck. And I'm like, cool, okay. And the reason for that is often there's something more. For some of us, it really is a case, if you want to go to the gym more, okay, let's set up good routines.
Yep.
Right? You want to stop smoking? Okay, let's remove all tobacco from your life and put in habits that are going to, when the cue for the smoking happens, you do something else.
Yep.
For other people, there's totally other things going on, right? So in my book, one of the things I wanted to tackle was it's not just habits. There's the way that your brain's set up, so heuristics, self-sabotage, the games we play in relationships, and the patterns we repeat across history. So it's kind of getting people into the mindset of, can you compassionately see that you might have a piece in this? And if so, let's find out what uniquely to you is keeping you stuck, because it may not just be your habits.
So good. I love that it's like a 5-prong approach, basically, like looking at, because everyone is so unique and we do have our things, but the history patterns is something that I've always been just enthralled with. I'm really like dialed into patterns. I love it. And I always think about, and a lot of my work is based on not a lot of Freud's work, but repetition compulsion, which is one of his, these original concepts, where, because it's so counterintuitive, right? It's counterintuitive to think we would repeat a crappy relationship we saw between our parents in our own life, because we've consciously said, I'm never doing that. I will never do that. But if you don't do something to not do that, it's just like recovery, right? In the rooms we talk about, it's not about, not picking up. It's like planning to not pick up. It's like actually putting things in place, right? Because so much of the time when people relapse, when it comes to addiction, they go, I didn't plan to relapse. That wasn't even my drug. And you're like, right. But you don't have to plan to relapse. You have to plan to not relapse. And I feel
100%.
like, yes, that there's a similarity in this, is in understanding that if it's our nature, as you say, and as you write in the book, to repeat patterns from history, I think something powerful about that is really looking at them. And exactly what you said, does this feel familiar to you in some way? Which way? How? Why? Right? And sort of like excavating what is down there. And that is unique
and
to
showing
you.
people that they have more information than they thought, right? Because often when we end up in therapy or talking to our friends, you don't have to be in therapy, saying, I'm really stuck in kind of relapsing into old patterns or dating to the same person. We often feel kind of clueless, right? But actually, when you just sit with someone, you're like, when does this feel familiar? Who started this? Actually, was this 3 generations ago that this came from? Why might it be around? We can lift some of the shame and help people kind of get to, oh, that's actually a good reason why I'm doing this. It's not because I'm insert kind of negative comment here,
Exactly.
negative self-belief here. So I really love this work because I think it's really empowering. There's something really important about empowering people here, because I often will work with someone who, let's say, for example, saw this kind of very detrimental relationship growing up, and will then say, I was dating and I met this person, and I had no idea when I met them that it was going to end up falling into the same pattern. But now I'm
Yep.
dating someone who's rejecting me in exactly the same way as I felt as a child. Someone told me this because I'll always repeat my patterns. Is that because you think I seek out rejection? I'm like, oh my goodness, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's nothing kind of massive. Well, sometimes we can be masochistic, but this isn't a masochistic
Right.
thing, right? It's that this is familiar to you. Or maybe, for example, this is the moment when you were hoping, I couldn't fix it then, but maybe I can fix it now.
Yes.
Maybe this rejecting person will say, you know what, I choose you.
Yep.
So for me, the beauty of talking about getting unstuck is showing people that often those patterns that have got them stuck really come from a good place,
Yep.
started for good reason,
Yep.
and is part of almost their soul trying to make things better for them. It just doesn't work for them anymore.
Yes, totally. And I love that generous way, but it's truthful. I think it's an accurate way. So that you're looking at it, but I actually really love that because we want to move away from that self-judgment and the self-recrimination where it's like
Mm.
I'm so bad or I'm an idiot. How could I find myself here again? I
Mm.
imagine it this way with attraction. I always see like unconsciously the cracked pot always finds the perfectly cracked lid to
Oh, I
fit,
love that. Yeah.
right? These childhood injuries that we have. A lot of Harville and Helen Hendricks work really speaks to me. You know them. They wrote like Getting the Love You Want and Keeping the Love You Find and all that. And they've been around for a really long time. But in seeing that we attract people who are a lot of times mirroring our childhood wounding. And
Mm.
in one way, we look at it like with the hope, as you said, of doing it different. And if you've done work, both of you have done some work, I do think that our relationships can be incredibly healing containers for us.
Mm.
And I've also seen over and over again that they can actually not be. And that without new skills or new insights or new understanding of self and original injuries and all of that, it's very easy to just be like, wow, this is like negative Groundhog Day.
Yes, and without the planning, right? You've talked about so people who are in recovery from addictions, planning. So what will you do when you are in this scenario in the future, even if you
Yes.
don't intend to slide back or
Yep.
slide sideways into a different pathway? Same in a pattern in a relationship, right?
Yep.
You need to plan for. I often talk with clients about this kind of feeling. So they'll be like, I'm really excited. I'm in this new relationship. Part of me is afraid, however, that this is going to be another one of those Groundhog Day moments. I'm like, okay. So in your last relationship afterwards, we talked about what were some of the things you noticed early on? Like what were some of the feelings in your body?
Mhm.
Was it really panic rather than excitement? Okay. And if it is,
Yeah.
how does that feel differently? Right. Like, so we're planning a bit like when people are saying, before I reached for the drink, before I reached for the cigarette, before I reached for that thing, how did I feel? What did I notice? What was going on inside of me? We're getting people in touch with those internal cues and then planning, okay, when you feel that again in the future, what are we going to do?
Right. And that what's so great about that, Soph, is when we bring it, as I say, from the basement to the main part of the house,
Yeah.
if you attracted someone and there is a similarity, you can do something different. Instead
Mm,
of letting it slide, like instead of letting the red flag slide, you can
mm,
commit to asserting yourself. You can commit to saying something. If you see something, say something, as they say here in the US about bombs or whatever it is. That I think is really helpful if you're in a relationship and you're like, oh my God, I'm starting to feel the way that I used to. Why? Because it is so much better, and talk about getting unstuck, right? It's so much better to know whatever it is, to know it early. I always say early and often with asserting yourself,
mm.
boundaries, because you know what? Why are we going to wait 2 years to find this out, right? Once
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah,
entrenched.
yeah.
No?
Um, do you know the poem by Portia Nelson? There's a hole in the sidewalk.
Mm-mm.
Okay, I think it's sidewalk. I think it's the American word rather than the British pavement. Okay, so it's it's basically the poem is just repetition of the same verse with something changing. So I walk down the sidewalk. There's a hole. I want to say pavement. I'm British.
You
A
could say
sidewalk feels so
pavement. Say it.
good. Okay, perfect. So I'm walking down the pavement. There's a hole. I fall in. It's not my fault. I get out. I carry on walking. I walk down the pavement. There's another hole. I see the hole. I still fall in. It's not my fault. I get out. You see where this is going. I walk down the pavement. I see the hole. I fall in. This time it is my fault because I knew it was there, yet I still got in. I get out and decide, to do this again. And the final one, it says, I walk down a pavement. I see the hole. I go down a different road. Now, this poem to me is spectacular because often we assume when we recognize that we are stuck and that we know logically that we need to change our behavior, that we should do it. But actually that feeling, the pull to old patterns, again, whether we're talking about sitting on the sofa rather than going to the gym, whether we're talking about reaching for the drink when we know that we said we wouldn't, whether we're talking about dating that person where now we've seen maybe 10 red flags, right? We're not just talking about one amber flag. The compulsion to continue because it feels on some level familiar, good, amazing, alluring to us. The compulsion is much stronger than people realize. So often when people are changing their behavior, in my book, Unstuck, I don't just talk about why, I talk about actually like, what do you need to do once you've figured out that you're in this situation? But the compulsion to keep doing it anyway is much stronger than people realize. And often what happens is people will, with awareness, keep doing it. First, they'll pretend they weren't aware, right? And then they'll be like, oh, my friends are saying I need to not date this person, but oh, well, I seem to just keep doing it. And then eventually someone says, okay, now I understand. I know that this is harming me. Enough is enough. I'm willing to do what is required to change the behavior.
Yep.
And then that's when we walk down the different pavement.
Love it. All right. So in the book, you talk also about drama triangles. So can you say a little bit about that? Let's unpack it.
Yeah. So in the drama triangle, it's basically the idea that we repeat conflict and we are drawn to 3 different roles in our relationships or in every conversation, because we could be in a different role in any moment, right? So this is the victim, the perpetrator. Sometimes people call that the villain, and the rescuer. We'll all have something that we're drawn to just in our day-to-day. So for example, I'm not afraid to admit that one of the reasons that I became a therapist isn't just, the panic attacks I mentioned before. It's because I am drawn to this role of rescuer. I have, as a child, because of the experiences I had very young, derived worth through feeling needed by other people, by, when I help them. So we're all kind of drawn to these roles. The victim role isn't the idea of, well, you put yourself in the situation, that's why you're being treated badly. When we talk about the victim role in the drama triangle, we're talking about when we feel disempowered, right? So you might have something going on in your life where you're like, I have no options. There's nothing I can do about this. This is happening to me. So let's say, for example, you're in work, your boss is continuously micromanaging you. Over time, you can start to feel very disempowered. When people are constantly chipping away at you, you feel like you don't have any options. That's when we can feel like we're in the victim position. So we have no options. The opposite of that is just deciding there are things that I can do in my life. Then the persecutor or the perpetrator, that's the person who's doing the chipping away, right? Now, again, I'm not talking about abuse scenarios here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, for example, you get home from work and you find out your partner hasn't done the washing up. Yeah. And maybe you then, rather than saying, hey, the washing up hasn't been done, could you do that? Right. Which is just adult to adult questioning. You instead are like, oh my God, you never do the washing up. You're such a child. I can't believe I'm having to do this for you again. Right. You notice the difference between just mentioning what needs to be done and asking about it and suddenly kind of coming on the attack. That's when we might slip into the persecutor role. We all are drawn to a specific role. And then within our relationships, we tend to have conflict that repeats our patterns. So let's say, for example, I come home, I'm the persecutor in that moment. The other person might come in and then do something very smart, which is say something like, rather than just saying, sorry, I'll do it next time, which is staying in this kind of adult position, they might be like, I can't believe you just spoke to me this way. It's so unbelievably rude. And then rather than taking responsibility, focus on the way they were spoken to and kind of take on this more like victimized role. Does that make sense? Disempowered rather than having the option of saying, it's not okay for you to speak to me this way. I'm going to do the washing up. We need to talk about the way that we talk. So the drama triangle is a really helpful way of understanding what roles we're drawn to in life, how conflict plays out in our relationships, and why we might get stuck in certain patterns and feeling certain ways throughout our life.
So the rescuer, because it's interesting. I find that with the work that I do, I have a new book coming out about high functioning codependency, and I find that
Yeah.
I'm very also identified with the rescuer role. Have been in my life, in my young life, and then through lots of therapy, I've forced myself to be less of a rescuer, because really, there's a codependent element to this insta or this auto rescuing of others,
Yes.
and a presumption too. It's like, I am presuming that you need rescuing and that I will be, it's all about me, kind of. There's a centering of self
Yes.
in the
Yes. Yes.
rescuer role that I'm so familiar with myself. Again, this is a stuckness issue, at least that I see in my therapy clients and what I can see in my groups, that we don't know how to not rescue,
Yeah.
and we have to learn. So what are your thoughts about putting down any of those roles?
So again, come from a place of compassion. uh, Notice which one you gravitate to and recognize that this is not your only role. So someone who is drawn to a rescuer will also slide into the victim position, will also slide into the persecutor position.
Yeah.
Often, if you are a rescuer listening to this, I'm laughing because this happens to me, or used to happen to me much more, but happens often. You will notice things like this. Someone says, I'm having a really hard day, rather than just saying, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Tell me about it. Or, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to do something? We jump straight in with the, have you thought about trying this? How about this? And the other person's, yeah, but. And so you offer another solution. And they're like, yeah, but. And you offer another solution. And in the end, because the other person just wanted to feel heard and you're wanting, obviously, to rescue, everyone's trying, feels like they're trying their best, but you end up both becoming really frustrated. And the
Yeah.
rescuer ends up saying, well, I was only trying to help. Right. So
Yeah.
that's where you switch position from rescuer into, you feel like you're now the victim because you're trying really hard, but actually you're acting as the persecutor, right? You're kind of giving that metaphorical slap to the other person of like, well, I'm
Yeah.
only trying to help you. What's wrong with you? So
Yeah.
compassionately recognize what role you're in. Second, notice that you're not just going to be in that role. Third, what was really great about the drama triangle is that we know that there's a solution to it, which they call inverting the triangle, which
Mm.
means if you tend towards the rescuer, you want to change that role to being more like a coach. Because this is the thing, there's a way of supporting people without rescuing them. Do you know what I mean?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
So,
that distinction is so clear. The
yeah.
distinction between having something thoughtful, or perhaps that you think is helpful if they've given you permission to share it with them.
Mm,
Sure, that's
mm,
coachy.
mm.
Rescuing is basically saying, I know what you should do more than you know what you should do.
And I don't trust that you're adult enough to figure this out for yourself or to do it by
Absolutely.
yourself with me supporting you. And as therapists, when I remember when I first qualified, I definitely
Mhm.
tried to rescue. I was like, here I come to save the day, rather than you tell me about you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sit alongside you and work with you so that you can empower yourself out of this. So
Yeah.
if you're someone who tends towards the rescuer, this might, for example, involve hearing someone say they have a hard day and you simply saying, I'm really sorry to hear that. Do you want to talk about it? And then that's
Yep.
it.
Yes.
Recognizing the impetus to try and step in. And if they keep talking, you can say, would you like to keep talking? Would you like to be distracted? Would you like to problem solve together?
Yep.
Right? If you notice that you're stuck in that game of, yeah, but, right? Why don't you, yeah, but? So you're saying, why don't you try this? And they say, yeah, but. Just simply say, this sounds really difficult. What do you think you're going to do about it? Right. So at that point, you're
Yes.
handing back the power to the other person. Step out, recognize when you're in rescuer, recognize that this maybe belongs to something from your childhood, for example, where the way that you felt good, needed, worthy, lovable was by stepping in and rescuing. Offer
Mm.
yourself, some real compassion around that, because it comes from a really good place, the tendency to rescue. And then decide to step into coach. If, for example, persecutor is the thing that you tend towards, again, this more often than not comes again from a good place, which is either that when you were young, you felt that the only way that you'd kind of be listened to, loved, cared for was if you were always right. Do you know what I mean? If you
Mm.
kind of always knew the answer, if you stepped up and told everyone else what to do, or if you saw adults in your lives kind of gaining respect and power by always being right, by always being kind of
Yep.
resentful. When we're in the persecutor mode, we want to step into challenger. So this is where we make a distinction between critiquing someone and simply challenging, offering, oh, I actually don't think in the same way, right? Rather than you're the problem, it becomes, curious, I hadn't thought about it that way. I disagree, and this is why. So we make it less personal. We
Yep.
challenge other people to think. If we're in the victim mode, if we tend towards that, we want to step into the creator. So this is where we're saying, okay, I feel like I have no options, but if I'm playful with this, what can I try? Now, again, I'm not talking about abuse scenarios. I'm just talking about moments in our lives where we feel totally disempowered, like the world is happening to us. We say, okay, I'm going to figure out a million other things I can do. Some of them might never work. I'll speak to my friends, think about what they could offer in terms of solution. But mainly I'm going to come back to a position of I have probably got more choices than I thought.
Love. Each person listening or watching this, it's like you can see yourself, and now you actually have, like, to a degree, you have your marching orders. And for those of you listening and feeling like you really want to get unstuck, Dr. Soph has a really great quiz on her website that they can get it at drsoph.com?
Yes.
Great. And this will really kind of help you sort of make the distinction. And also, obviously, her book is for sale. You can buy her book anywhere that fine books are sold. Tell us where we can find you.
So website, drsoph.com, Instagram _Dr Soph. And I have a blog and newsletter you can sign up to on my website. I'm also the British mental health expert for Headspace. So I'm often around and about in magazines doing their work. But yes, we've talked about kind of the whys we get stuck and some of the beginning ways of thinking about getting unstuck. But I really did do a deep dive in the book, and it's something that I'm really proud of, and I hope people will find it very useful.
I bet they will. I hope, and I have no doubt that you loved this episode with Dr. Soph. You have all the information. Everything is in the show notes. So go take that quiz, go get that book, and let's get unstuck together, because this is what we're doing in life. Thank you for being with us.